But of course, Hurricane Fiona pelted Puerto Rico and the Dominican Republic. Most of the island was without power because um, that's just how it ends up being a lot of the times. Where like even after Hurricane Maria that hit a couple years ago,
And
there,
Irma right before that.
yeah,
Yeah,
that
they had like back-to-back hurricanes that year.
that really pelted Puerto Rico and the Dominican Republic so much so. And remember that dumb clip of Trump basketball hooping paper towels to people in need when he was president. That was all he was doing for Puerto Rico at the time.
Yeah.
So there was some infrastructure that was built. Not definitely not enough, but there was some. People had electricity and power generators and gas generators because it's
It
very
took
much
11 months though for the entire all of Puerto Rico to actually get its power back on. 11 months. Insane.
yeah. And so this is the intersection of like disaster capitalism where you try to make money off of disasters, but that money is like a lot of capitalism. It's short lived, it's short sighted. It's to make a quick buck with no thought to the long term implications of what's happening. Even though we're under a democratic administration, not enough attention is really being brought to this, and it could be an opportunity for other major, maybe not Joe Biden, I'm not even expecting that much, but other major politicians on the left, even just Democrats in general, to say, we need to start taking Puerto Rico more seriously. We need to not start taking climate more seriously because it's just going to keep hitting this part of the country more frequently and more intensely. And we need to have a long term plan rather than just like band aiding our infrastructure because people are
No, we
hurting and
don't do
dying.
long-term plans though. Everything that we do is for the short-term gain and we'll deal with the future later. And that's why we're in a lot of the problems and a lot of the situations that we're currently faced with. And I mean, I live in Houston, so this is an issue that's close to my heart. The storms are getting worse, right? They're getting bigger, they're getting stronger, and they're getting wetter, right? And I actually covered this for Rebel HQ recently and talked about it a little bit. But the storms, I mean, obviously global warming is a problem, and these storms are fueled by the heat, right? They're fueled by the heat in the ocean, the warmer oceans, and they're fueled by the heat in the air. And the heat in the air, whenever the oceans are hot and the air is hot, they evaporate more. There's more water that gets evaporated into the air. And then these clouds with the warmer air, they just like hold on to all that moisture, right? So they're holding more moisture in these storms. So even though it's like a tropical storm or a category 1 or 2, that's just wind speed. It doesn't say anything about the rainfall potential, right? And so now they're just dumping the ocean onto these places. And in Houston specifically, I don't know if this is as much of a problem in the Caribbean or in Puerto Rico, but the jet stream used to kind of push these storms along. And we kind of messed with the jet stream too because also climate change has changed it a little bit. And so now the storms are just kind of staying in one spot longer. They're not moving as quickly as before because before they would at least spread out the rainfall a little bit more. And now it's just like dumping it all in one spot. So that happens. It's a lot of different things. And here in Houston, and I know that Puerto Rico probably has very similar issues to this, but in Galveston, Texas, which is our coastline, it's like maybe 30 minutes south of where I'm sitting right now. Galveston is an island and it buffers the coast for, the mainland. And they have a seawall there, and they put it there after this huge hurricane hit back like 100 years ago, right? They say we need something to protect us from the ocean, from the storm surge specifically. And the storm surge is the most devastating and deadly part of the hurricane, and it affects the coastal areas. It's right where the storm comes ashore and it just shoves the ocean onto the land, and it's very dangerous.
As we're kind of
And
seeing in this B roll here from ABC Nightline.
yeah, yeah, there was like their bridges are collapsing down there. It's terrible. Like these storms are so powerful, and they're almost so powerful that it's hard to wrap your head around it. That something just a storm can be so devastating and cause so much damage. And these are islands that are sitting in the middle of the sea, right? So here on the mainland, we have the benefit of being on the mainland. So anytime the storms get too close to us, they tend to slow down because they're fueled by the ocean. So the minute that they hit land, they slow down a little bit. Puerto Rico is not going to do anything to slow down a hurricane, right? And that's why in the Caribbean, a lot of these little islands, they get hit by very, very, very strong, very severe, catastrophic storms. And they don't have the infrastructure, they don't have the support system to kind of rebuild after each one. I feel like I was saying something else somewhere, but I'm sure that point will come back to me at some point.
No, no, thank you for providing that context. And it's exactly right. Like as we're saying, these storms are getting worse. They're fueled by the ocean, and
Mhm.
we I'm not even accepting the fact that America doesn't like to plan for things long term as enough of a judgment. I'm not even accepting the fact that, oh well, Puerto Rico is an island and it's just going to be more susceptible to hurricanes. They're gonna have to deal with it or move as a judgment, right? No, this
Yeah.
is an American territory. These are Americans here, and it's dumb and jingoistic to say that, oh, because they're part of our country we should care more. No, it's saying because it's part of our country we can have like a direct action onto it. Like a lot of times when these happen in countries internationally, we feel like all we can do is donate. But like, no, no, there are, because Puerto Rico's in a weird limbo situation, there are senators and congress people we can talk to and go like, hey, these are people with less representation than a lot of us have in the continental United States, plus Alaska and Hawaii, and we want to sort of express that power, like express that ability for people in Puerto Rico who can't. Like, there are people with Puerto Rican ancestry in Congress. I know, like AOC has talked a lot about what's going on with Puerto Rico as well, but it can't just be her because Puerto Rico is today. Tomorrow, it's Miami or like New Orleans again, or God forbid, like near Galveston or Houston, or like, yo, it was not something to worry about. It was actually really awesome weather here, but we had a hurricane or like a tropical storm in Southern California, like in San Diego and Los Angeles, like up here for the first time since I was a kid. Like when I was a kid was definitely the worst time because the water spouts started by the tropical storm or whatever turned into tornadoes because they touched land, and
Yeah.
I was living closer to the beach by the time, and so like it was actually a little bit of an issue for my house.
Oh
But
my God.
that was way back in the aughts at some time. I was like really young. I don't remember that much except for I really wanted to go to GameStop that day. My mom said no, and once again my mom was right. But like yeah, we had our first like hurricane type vibes in just the other week because these storms
God.
are having the ability to, usually they dissipate out in Baja California, the little like land strip of California below the state border that's Mexico territory, as though all of California shouldn't be Mexican's territory, but that's another episode. But like, usually those storms kind of peter out by Baja California and areas of that. No, it came up all the way to Central California and petered out. So that's all to say
That's
that
insane.
this is going
Yeah.
to, and honestly, all I got was just like, oh wow, it's raining outside and it's a little bit humid, but it's like 80 degrees and it's 11 p.m. Oh, this feels a little bit Mediterranean. This is kind of fun. But like, no, no, but like, jokes aside, this is going to happen to more of America, and it says to say, but it's going to happen to parts of America with like regular levels of representation who are going to get
Yeah.
like, frankly, white people who are going to get fucking pissed that their government is not doing much for them. And if there is more response to like their reactions, then what are we not doing for Puerto Rico? What are we not doing for like Guam? And like all of our other like Marshall Islands, other little disparate island territories, right? That we
Yeah, I
always
was
forget
gonna
about.
say, like, we treat Puerto Rico so poorly, but there are other territories that we have, just like Puerto Rico, that are in very similar situations. I mean, they're not getting hit by a hurricane as far as like representation in our government and how well we even acknowledge that we are we're lording over them. But I do remember my earlier point from before. I was going to mention something about the Galveston seawall. So they built this wall to protect the city and the island and then the coastal areas from the storm surge, right? Because it's very, very damaging. And that seawall was built over 100 years ago and it hasn't really been updated since then, right? It's falling apart and it needs to be repaired. And the cost for these repairs and all of the, the environmental accommodations that they would need to do to continue to expand the seawall, it would cost like a few $1 billion to do that, right? Which sounds like a lot of money, right? But I just double checked to make sure this figure in my head was right, and it is, and it's crazy. Hurricane Harvey, when it hit Texas, was like a category 4 storm, and it was I'm sure you guys remember, it was a big deal. At least here in Houston it was. And it cost $125 billion. That's how much damage it caused in Houston. And those are federal funds that had to be funneled over to Houston and help us rebuild. So maybe let's say $5 billion that it would take to repair the seawall compared to $125 billion doesn't make sense. So,
And
and there's probably something to do there with how where the money comes from and things like that. And but at the end of the day, like, you still have to do it. And then here in Houston, that's extra important because if a big enough storm hits there's a certain part of Houston, the Port of Houston, right, which is kind of like an inlet of the Gulf. So it's very, very vulnerable to these storms. If a strong enough storm hits the Port of Houston, that is a national problem. That is an international problem because that is where all of the Houston oil and gas industry is sitting. Those are where all the oil refineries are. It's a big deal. Houston is the energy capital of the entire world, not the country, the world. If something happens to the Port of Houston, it's going to be a big deal. It's going to be bad, and it's going to be also disastrous. It's going to cause, it's going to be there's going to be oil everywhere.
I'm old enough to remember the Deepwater Horizon oil spill by my boys, British Petroleum, and
Your friends, BB.
my friends. Last time to pay the bills. PowerPoint sponsored by British Petroleum. Over my cold dead body, by the way. But um I remember that
That's
oil.
Iranian oil too. That's British. They went and they built an Iranian oil field. Yeah.
Oh yeah, of course. Wherever the oil is, they will go
Your
for
friends
it.
BP.
Yeah, absolute friends the pod. But I remember that oil spill and how drastic that was, and that was, I don't even think that was caused by a hurricane. That was just like sort of like a disaster on its own. But obviously these hurricanes exacerbate them. But to the point about what you're talking about with this habit where in Galveston they just didn't fix the issue when it originally happened. So through FEMA and the remnants of the leftover agency in Puerto Rico, the energy agency that had gone bankrupt. I wonder why these energy companies keep going bankrupt.
Yeah.
They had roughly $12.8 billion, according to FEMA, in June, but only about $1.6 billion of the money. Wait, hold on, let's see. No, it's around 8, 9. No. Yeah, that's $1 billion and that's $1 million. So really, like $1.7 billion in emergency categories has been spent in Puerto Rico. Over 0.05% of the funds to permanently restore the power grid. So basically, because there's this bureaucratic back and forth between what FEMA wants to do and what Puerto Rico's power grid wants to do.
And remember, Trump also blocked that money from getting to them as when they needed it most.
Yeah.
So there was $20 million that was congressionally approved to go to Puerto Rico for the rebuild, and Trump just didn't send it. And there was a lot of bureaucracy that he was hiding behind. But then it was later found that he also obstructed the investigation into why the money never got to where it was going to go. And then on top of that, they were dealing with that. But then they also had, going forward after that, I think those storms hit in, what was that, 2017 or 18? I don't remember what year it was. But it might have been 2017. But whenever that happened, there was a pandemic that came right afterwards. There was all kind of supply chain issues that they were dealing with. So all these things kind of helped to slow. Oh, inflation also increased a lot of the costs of the things that they needed to repair, for the labor costs, for everything. So they kind of kept getting hit with a lot of hindrances that prevented them from rebuilding as quickly as they otherwise would have been able to. And some of the funds were mismanaged for one reason or another.
Yeah, I remember especially like the crypto heads were trying to get into the crypto heads were really trying hard to get into rebuilding Puerto Rico as some sort of like utopia for their crypto ideas as opposed to like actually looking at the real needs of what they um would have like actually required in Puerto Rico. The idea of we're going to rebuild Puerto Rico on the blockchain or using Bitcoin back at a time where these processes
Read
are
the
very
room.
yeah.
Yeah.
First of all, read the room. Second of all, these processes are very energy intensive, and this is a place that has no power grid.
There's literally no power. Like,
C.1, read the room.
just go to Kazakhstan like everyone else. But there is like a very fringe idea, I guess you can call it, that they're not doing anything about Puerto Rico because they want all the Puerto Ricans to just leave so that all the billionaires can just go and buy the land and then they'll fix everything. So that's like a, like I said, it's a very fringe idea. Just thought
Yeah,
I'd mention it though. Not
yeah.
saying that
There, there, there,
endorse it. It's just something I came across.
there is that belief that exists with a lot of gentrification situations where, like, if you,
Make it bad enough.
yeah, make it so bad and uninhabitable that the people who want to live there leave, so you can raise it and then make it more profitable for others. So,
Yeah.
um, ultimately, this is yet another example of America needing to not put band-aids on situations to actually address situations. Climate justice, environmental racism, all of these things need to be better looked at in our government, in by our politicians both on the left and on the right.
Yeah, and these issues are so frustrating because I was thinking about this when Maha was on, right? And she's so like well versed about the entire industry and she has opinions on what would be better and what would be worse for the industry. And they're not talking to people like her, right? Because she's looking at it from like a bigger picture kind of thing. And everybody else, like the decision makers, I'll say, are looking at it specifically from like a very political and economic point of view, right? And that's all that really matters to them. And in an issue like, we can argue that cannabis is a more political issue, but something like this is really just science and it's just it's nature, right? And the world and just living, right? It's basic living, right? And we have scientists and experts who can tell you exactly what needs to be happen, how much it'll cost. They've done extensive research on these topics. And we just look at them and we're like, meh, we're just gonna not do that because we don't feel like it or because that doesn't really work for us for some kind of political reason or financial reason, or I don't get enough of a kickback off of this if I do it. Why should I do this? Why should I help you? There's all these reasons why things that need to happen, things that can happen, just don't happen, and it's all very frustrating.